I have to, well, I try, but I have to make it very entertaining because you're putting in the time to come here. That's what I mean. Oh, oh, you've changed it, right? Good. Yes. I wonder what the balance is, if it's good. All right. I'm going to talk for 75 minutes. Isn't that exciting? Okay. Kind of is for me. All right. So, no, I feel terrible. All right. So, but that's what we're supposed to do, I think. I'm a bit of an old school kind of person like that. I know we should play games and things like that. We do a little bit, right? But the very clever ones end up with you teaching yourselves and grading each other and the whole. Right, yeah. But yeah, I don't think that's great. Okay, so a few little upgrades. So these, I mean, this is ridiculous, but these videos will look a little bit better. The ones that are recorded in class, there's a limit to what we can do. I could bring in $1,000 owl thing that focuses anyway, but that's too much. So these will be better, and there'll be pictures of Pratchett involved. So there's a lot of maniacal stuff that goes on in the background, obviously, that counts for very little. So someone asked me the other day, I said that this is the 16th version of the course because we had some people visiting from Mass Mutual yesterday, and this is about a new. So we have this $5 million gift from them, and we've been doing work with them, and it's a new idea that may come for the next round. Anyway, so we had a whole team visiting, and one of the core people was in the very first version of this, which was Basics of Complex Systems, called Box, I guess, but which was just a 295 course. But someone else said, has it evolved since then? And I'm like, yeah. So, and it was just called Complex. Actually, the very first, this is the website. This is fantastic. As one of my daughters once said, no one knew anything about design. Like design was only invented after 2000. And what she meant was looking at old web pages. Well, 2010, I suppose, yeah. See, nothing works. It's great. That's it. That's the whole course. It was all on the board, which maybe some of you would enjoy, but it's evolved a lot since then. And then we got the basics of complex systems, and then it became a thing. I'm in computer science now, but I used to be in math for a long time before, finally gave up and saw the light, I suppose. But it's my personal journey. I'll tell you more about it at some point. But I taught linear algebra for a long, long time. I love linear algebra, and it's still a disaster. Linear algebra is a disaster. Like, you guys come in and you learn calculus, 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 and then maybe you do some linear algebra, and there's some eigenvector stuff pops in another. Anyway, it's a mess, and it should be taught like together. It should be, you should do a couple of courses in linear algebra. Anyway. And I mean that from a very practical point of view. We have former students come back and they say the things they should have learned were probability and linear algebra, to be useful humans in the world, in a data science kind of space. Anyway, I have a whole course on there. It's based on skill strengths from MIT. It's a story. That one's a story. It's great. So I call it matrixology because linear algebra is just terrible branding, absolutely dreadful. Okay, so and all the pure math teachers they're all trying to sneak you into pure math. So it's all like, this is just a little, fate. Like I've heard them say 1 in 40 students were interested in that person. So, no. All right. Anyway, I gave up. So I'm going to tell you those things, tirade time, better videos. Oh, I'll show you this nonsense. Can you see these up here? So these are pteropods. I have cephalopods, megapods are the big ones, sauropods, and zoogopods. Anyway, there's a whole nomenclature system I have for these things. This is, well, it might not be, but there's a stormy petrel and a Antarctic petrel, and then have a Garmin 3, GoPro Max, which is what do I call that one? A sooty albatross. Anyway, but there are reasons for these names. Like, these things are animals, so platypuses and quokkas and potoroos, and these are more large birds. Yeah, this structure. I just want to tell you this little structure. Sorry, there's questions for some reason. Yes.
Just information, I guess, but like a linear algebra thing. A bunch of my friends are like other schools taking like similar classwork. They all get linear algebra taught through them like through 25, which is something like we don't do here. Just wanted to know.
There's been an effort to do that, right? And the engineers want it. I mean, sure, totally. MATLAB, well, pure math had Mathematica, so that's what they want to That's what they want to. We have a connection math, but which is madness to me, right? It's madness. You know, Matrix. I mean, MATLAB at least, which is no good because you know the world it's not free. I use it. It is very powerful. Matrix laboratory. I mean, it's a great thing. But yeah, Python and R and whatever. You should be. Julia's the yeah. Julia's. Well, that's my hope for the future. Anyway, yeah,
I agree.
yeah. Do it. Just make it like just be Julia programmers.
Julia should be the only language that
Yeah. Teach me Julia. So I'm excited about Julia because I feel like that's a better. Anyway, instead of like 50 million Python installations, and you're like, what is going on? You've got there's one which is like MATLAB, but it's limited. You know, it's limited, and none of them have good graphics. MATLAB actually has. You can make beautiful graphics with MATLAB, and I'll show you things that came out of MATLAB today. That's why I haven't moved because, anyway. I agree, and there was a forking that was forced, which linear algebra got turned into two pieces. One is just apparently pure linear algebra, and the other one is applied, where you have one question per assignment in MATLAB or Python, whatever. Which I also like. I think that's also not great though. You should. It's a pencil and paper. You should do real pencil and paper stuff with, because it's so fantastic. You really should understand it deeply, and it's all about ax equals b. Ax equals b. That's it. I mean, that's enough for a whole course. It's a beautiful thing. So much comes out of that. You know, and so this course is about, you know, the more is different, right? The sum of the parts is what is it? The whole is greater than equal to the sum of, greater than the sum of the parts, right? And linear algebra is the whole is equal to the sum of the parts. It's good. Anyway, you should know that there is all sorts of stuff in the background. Assignment 4, there's some humorousness about assignment 4. So in the classic way of someone saying something and then everyone else has to do push-ups, it's not quite that. I'm not doing that. There's a baby named question here, and I did change things around because today I'm going to talk about allotaxonometry, which is where it should go. It's something I've been developing for a few years, and then you can build these. This is in MATLAB. We'll see how we go. It's like a 6,000 line monstrosity that I created. So we'll see. Let me talk about that today. Yes, you had a question too. Did you ask?
Yeah, I was just wondering, because it seems like not really a wombat doesn't seem to follow your naming convention. I was wondering what
Yeah, not really a wombat was a old laptop that got messed up. It had to get renamed because they all can end up everything. Yeah, you don't want everything being such and such as fourth iPad or whatever, right? Like, I mean, you can do that, but you will hate yourself at some point. I have a 64 terabyte hard drive at home for all the videos and stuff and data and whatever. And that's called Great Southern Land, which is Australia, right? And there's the bungles in there. There's all sorts of because for data storage, it's about physical, it's trees and space. Yeah, you store put in the outback. Yeah.
And you don't want to call it the Giggly tree, I'm imagining.
No. I went through, what did I go? I went through, like flowers, like Sturt Desert Pea and stuff like that. Anyway, yeah, right. But then I went to ranges. Yeah. Okay, that's boiled off me, I suppose. Let me barrel along with the stuff. I think that's it. The world continues, sort of, in its funny way. So we talked. I just want to show you the stuff from Zip. And then we got to this, and this is just. I'm just going to show you quickly a few panels of Zip data. Spock. And yeah, I guess that is useful. All right, so this is this just sort of initial effort by Zip to try and understand, how things appear in at least in language, in written text, right? So it's very important with looking at a story, something that's written. It's not a encyclopedia, although that turns out to work in a similar way. But we're thinking about written corpora, and that are somehow unified in some way. Okay, so this has long been floating around, and we're going to come back to it and come back to it. This is sort of thought of as Zipf's law. Again, please don't name things after people, but I have to tell you what they're called. But there's this inverse, this 1 over r. So on a log scale, right, log 10 of f would be minus log 10 of r, just a simple minus sign. And this minus 1 is, I showed you on another thing that's equivalent to a gamma of -2 if we think about the frequency size distribution, right? Because this is Zip's approach was to rank things, not always, but generally to rank things, just the biggest to the smallest, and then plot their sizes, whatever the sizes are. And we figured out with the complementary cumulative distribution function, you can turn it all around. All right, and what was it again? So it's, and I generally call this alpha equals, I think that's right. Okay, so, okay, let's go. All right, so I just want to show you a few things. So I know we got to this, and this was all he managed to sort of frame in terms of sort of a mechanism. And it's not, we're going to be trying to think about mechanisms in this class, we're getting there. But this is sort of an old one that doesn't really hold up. Okay, this is a problem you could work on. Again, we have data for this. We need new data for it, but it's a very, this is starting to get a really sort of fundamental thing about language. It's not just how many times a word is used, but the meanings they're used in. And then it turns out there are zip distributions for a given word that has, say, 100 meanings. It has its own zip distribution in terms of, right, this is the most common way it's used out to the rare usages. I think the word, when I was a kid, a long time ago, set was we sort of hear that in class. I guess set was the word that had the most meanings, like 800 or something, the OED. And I think it's run now, right? Run programs. You can do lots of things with run. At some point, it gets a little silly, right? Because we're getting back to the ook thing where we have one word that means everything, right? Would you like to run some cereal? It's like, no. We need some speciality. Okay, so this is some new stuff, right? So this is where students were clearly forced to do this. This is Encyclopedia Britannica. Obviously, it's Wikipedia these days. Britannica still exists, but and this is a physical book. So the student is, deployed into the library, some small number of them, and told to measure with a ruler how long the articles are. Okay, right? So this is like, how much does it take to describe? Now with Wikipedia, that's a funny business, right? Because the Justin Bieber section is enormous, right? And the Star Trek sections are enormous.
Anime is more important than anything.
Anime is more, yeah, and then you find something really, and it does connect into this. One of my favorite Wikipedia pages is metaphor, right? Because it's not very long. Did I show you that in this class? I did. No. Because that's, and we've had students work on this. It's such a, maybe I did show you, I'm sorry. It's one of my favorite. It hasn't changed much over the years. If you can see this, let's, did I mention this? No, who knows? All right, actually, this is sort of a precursor maybe to the New Yorker. This is an old Puck magazine. And my wife and I, we were married in the Puck building, which is in Harry Met Sally, actually. Anyway, long time ago. So metaphor, right? Blah, 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 blah. There's some stuff, right? Yeah, it's nice. And then we get to our contents, etymology. It's different, it's some variations. It's not blah, blah, blah. And then 5.2 as a foundation of our conceptual system. So great. But yeah, that seems like a big deal, but it's this tiny little piece relatively, and that's it. But yeah, if we go to, so I don't know how well this maps onto things, but people care about, they do care about anime, they do care about, they do, right? So maybe we don't need. All right, so zip jumps out to other places, and I've tried to connect these two exponents, right? What they would be. The inversion of this is, right, so usually zip was measuring this exponent, and then we could get gamma from it. So, and once again, 2 for gamma is the on the cusp of an infinite mean, infinite variance. So, okay, it's the cusp of where you go from finite mean to infinite mean, and we've already got infinite variance. Yes, the words. This is for city. Well, cities are difficult. We've talked about them, metropolitan districts. So that was again one of these slopes, like a 1 over r kind of slope. That's what that line would be. He's not fitting regression lines. He's just sort of indicating them. when he says he has ideal here, or when I say he, I mean his students made these graphs, obviously. But I think that's fair to say. This is a minus 2/3 slope. This is number of, so this is going to be, the number of employees in a corporation. So again, this heavy tail distribution. I think that's going to be still the same. The biggest employer in many states is Walmart, right? I think it's a giant thing. So this is a different exponent. It's alpha equals 2/3. That's gamma is 5/2. So that's right in that 2 to 3 range, which is that sort of Danger Will Robinson. This is a crazy thing. So number of news items about distance from Chicago. And so this is this gravity law story, because population 1 times population 2 divided by distance. So you try to make it a function of that, and it seems to grow. And what's, the pieces that really change here are the population of the other city divided by distance. So, interesting thing. Maybe. Obviously, a lot of fluctuations. And then Washington, D.C. is going to be outsized. So pretty variable. And of course, this is, again, data that was amassed in the 30s and 40s by students. This is obituaries in the New York Times as a function of, distance away from New York City. New Jersey has its own, sort of special outlier thing. So he just kind of went wild, right? He's like, okay, let's just look at every sort of social thing we can measure. And it remains a really amazing book to sort of look through. This is city populations. This is going to be movement of stuff. So this is pounds of stuff. I don't know how they measured this one at the time, but this is how much stuff is being, freight is going back and forth between cities. Again, this gravity law kind of structure, but now we actually have P1 and P2 varying, right? Because it's not just anchored at one place. So that's not bad. Gravity law is being maybe used or suggested to apply to too much, and we've sort of come back from it. But clearly in some places it's fairly strong. This is I don't know why this is length of trip. There's trucks and passenger cars, how far people travel. Right. So the length, so there are some, this is the way it's done here, right? So some different kinds of graphs. This is the length of the trip and then the number of trips, right? So lots of little tiny ones, which makes sense. But again, This, I think, ideal is just saying, well, I don't know, that's a bit of a funny thing to write, but just trying to put in an example slope that's close. And it's this sort of, d over d plus 1 kind of thing, or Pythagorean thing where you're looking for a simple fraction, right? That feels like it might be explainable. He doesn't explain things. So this is just the, so this is number of family, this is movement. There's some beautiful updates to this in more recent work, different kinds of models for migration and gravity. Varying away from the gravity model, but this is number of people moving. Again, sort of a power law, maybe, at least heavy tail. And this is the last one I wanted to show. There are many others added to this list, I think. But this is how far away people lived growing up in Philadelphia. The people who got married, how far away they lived as children. And so, we've just got blocks here, right? There's only one order of magnitude here. Maybe it's a bit of a stretch, but it's like, the thought was, well, how does it work for that, right? So that's going to vary tremendously across the world, I suppose, and over time and so on. But I don't know. All right. So I'll show you one more thing. There are lots of other little plots that I have here, to do with languages. There's all sorts of things, blah, 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 blah. But let me just show you one last comment. And this appeared there was a Steve Strogatz article. So it's 12 years ago. Strogatz, some of you will know, you're very famous educator in the mathematics world. We'll talk about Strogatz later on when it comes to small world networks and the whole story we have there. But this is someone who read, right? So he was a student, and this is a dire thing. This is not great, but I think it's an interesting window to have because I know nothing about zip. I think this is probably indicative of how things worked, and of course we still have professors who do this sort of thing in some way. But and again, the victim like saying, "Oh, it's like it was helpful," right? Yeah. So literally the only thing I know about zip. And I mean, maybe I should have looked further, but there really isn't much. I mean, let's see where we are with Wiki George. Quite a name, Kingsley. Oh, there's a photo. There's a little more. No, that's it. Okay. If only written some anime, but did not. Okay. Well, and someone whose name is quite famous. You know, people, Zipf's laws, you know, we measure the zip, it's through papers everywhere. Yeah, no, right. Just exactly, yeah. One of my questionable things in pure math is the genealogical thing. If you want, you've got a PhD in math, you can get this printed out and sent you, and it's a giant genealogical tree of who was your PhD advisor and who was their PhD advisor. And then there's Euler way back up there. And yeah, it's like a vampire nerd cult, basically. Yeah. Who sired whom? Anyway. I'm, yeah, I guess culturally I'm against which I think the US is supposed to be as well, right? The whole inheritance of stuff. Anyway, I know it's a bit different. Okay, right, good. All right, so Zipf's laws. Yes, well, they appear everywhere. I'm trying to tell you that. And then here's some work. I developed this over the last few years, and of course, it's tied to this course, which has been going for a long time. But this was necessary to understand a whole bunch of things about how things are evolving in time, how these systems are evolving, right? I mean, so you have to think about maybe, well, how they, we're talking about rankings, right? So we're constantly sort of in the general world just kind of quite enamored by rankings and, who's the best tennis player this year, 10 years ago, and how does that change? What's the top ranked song, et cetera, books, and all these sorts of things. So universities, right? And I'll have some stuff later on about ranking, the one number measurement, just the perils of doing it. We can't help ourselves, but it is disastrous. Anyway, so let's see. So I'm going to tell you that there are lots of ways to measure between probability distributions and of course we're talking about zip distributions, a bit different, but the size frequency distributions, how do you compare them? And what we'll come up with is this notion of what started with a framing of ours, which is lexical turbulence, right? So you read the New York Times or you read Reddit one day, and you think about all the words that appeared. Of course, you can't do this, but you count up all the words that appeared on that day. They're relevant to the day in some way. And then a week later, you go and do the same thing. How have these things changed? So you expect like the, and of, and to kind of be relatively stable, function word type things. Maybe words that pertain to major characters in the world or countries or things. They might be stable for a while and so on. But there's going to be sort of huge fluctuations up and down, right? And if you look at something like Twitter or social media, of course, we have things that just spike every day, right? And you're like, oh, So you're going to capture those as well. But it's a socio-technical time series. They're all competing with each other. Just the word Monday or Tuesday, right? That's going to go up and down. It's going to appear on news. Blah, blah, blah. People are going to talk about it. There's going to be these things that are really governed by the fact that we're sitting on this planet that rotates around a sun, and there are these time scales and days and then weeks and years that kind of put in this cyclical stuff. Then we have shocks. Terrible things happen in the world. Sometimes, generally speaking, it's terrible things that kind of have the impact. Just to give you a sense of that, let's see if I can do it. So this is our measurement of happiness, and we're changing in various ways. But this is a measurement of happiness from Twitter. There's a lot of other stuff in here. They're all books and all sorts of things, and I do talk about this in the second volume of Pucks. But this is when the world sort of really wakes up to the pandemic being here. it was back here, and people were talking about it. Right in January, there was an awareness, right, because China was something was happening. There were these pictures, or in some videos, I suppose, but pictures of just big swathes of dirt with diggers everywhere making hospital beds, which is a bad sign. It's a bad sign, and I'm like, this is not good. So, but we took our eye off it, right? And we basically we have a paper about that. We sort of just took our eye off it. But this is where, in the space of about 10 minutes, Tom Hanks announces he and his wife have COVID. They're in Australia. It just becomes big news. The NBA canceled the season just abruptly. This is really within about 10 minutes. And then, and Trump was giving a speech for the first time. It was an Oval Office thing saying things aren't great. Like, so it was the first time he'd sort of said anything, negative. And the stock market started to tank, like just from the start of the talk, just went the futures. I have a paper where I talk about this. There was a fourth thing, which was Sarah Palin was appearing in a bear costume on the Masked Singer singing some song that I've forgotten right now. But that seemed to be irrelevant. Anyway, so that'll happen. This is the murder of George Floyd is on this day, and the protests grow. And so Twitter talking about it, this grows and grows and grows. So these are the two most negative events in history that we've been recording. This is like 12 years now. But you imagine like the words underneath this, there are the tweets you can think about, but just the words themselves, just the sort of zooming up and down, right? So George Floyd's name doesn't appear until this point in history, right? It's just not on Twitter. COVID, it's really coronavirus to start with, right? So we don't really say COVID for a while, but coronavirus is a thing. It's not something, it's a thing. You see it like trickling around like the millionth word sort of thing. But now it's like boom. And that had, this is incredible. So this is collective trauma, right? We've never seen this before. Usually a bad thing happens, some sort of negative event, the death of a celebrity, something, some sort of natural disaster. It is bad and people will talk about it, but overall it gets washed out by all the other news. It's not that, it just becomes a smaller number of people who really talk about it relatively. But this kind of response, this is much more like an individual trauma sort of response. And same here. And then this is the storming of the Capitol, and that's really actually the third. That was the third lowest thing. But going through these points here, with this day, we're watching this thing. We know there's sort of a limit to how much this can go up and down, but this was, obviously the reality of everything was much more shocking. But just with this instrument, we were measuring things. It was, yeah. Trouble. Yeah, so you see part of there's a big change here. I mean, that's a shift, and then a huge shift here. So a lot of it's retweeting. But there's a mixture. Some of it, depends on the event. Some is much more amplification. Some is just, everyone's talking about it. Yeah, which is, those cases are both a mixture. Yeah. Yeah, but in COVID, it was too late. It was far too late by that point. Like it clearly spread everywhere. So you've got these, what we're doing now is we're basically filtering words. We have about 10,000 words. We make hashtag versions, so it's 20,000. And we're taking all these tweets that are coming towards us. We don't read them because that's bad for your health, but also, there are 50 million a day. And so we kind of put a lens on it. And these words come filtering through, and we count them all, for which we have the ones for which we have scores. And then, of course, that's kind of, there's this turbulence every day of which words are, going up and down. I think there was a couple of days in 2012, if you look day to day, that were the least turbulent, moving from day to day, right? So the least turbulent would be the ZIF. One way to think about it is the ZIF distribution on one day, the next day, totally the same, or at least ranks, right? Basically the same, like the forest is the same the next day, right? The number of species, and the types of the number of species, the number of individuals in each species, completely the same from day to day. That's roughly true of forests, a little bit more, but news, explodes. So how do we do a better job of thinking about how these things move around? For the happiness stuff, we have this other thing called word shifts. We have a word shifter reader, which tells you what's driving stuff up and down. I'm taking too long, but if you click on this, for example, it pops up this word shift. So these are all these words that are pushing the score down relative to the week before. And you'll see a mixture. They're not always, it's not all uniform, right? So terrorist is being put up here as well because the story is sort of, being transformed and transmuted depending on who's talking about it. After Charlottesville, about 4 days after that, it became about statues, right? It became about the Confederate statues. That became sort of the dominant story. So you see the narrative shifting or being attempted to shift. But, protesters, racists, just the word no and not, these are being much more used. It's very simple what we're doing. You can see what's right or wrong. Attempts to talk about it being peaceful, less talk about coronavirus, which makes sense. So this helped that day, right? It gave a little bit more happiness to that day because you weren't talking about the pandemic. Yay. So, it makes sense why that happened, but, it's because something absolutely terrible had happened. And then, you can click around through these things, right? And it has a nice little shifty thing, sort of see which things. So and if you want, you can just see the bad ones, right? So these are just the bad ones. It's not clearing away properly. And then they'll just the happy ones. Okay. Andy Reagan is the former student who worked on that amazing machine. But that's a long-term development. And now we have a Python package. Right. Oh. Took all weekend. All right. So anyway, let's do that. So we do tend to make up words. Hedonimeter is the thing I just showed you. This is allotaxonometry. This is an allotaxonograph. Might be a little bit hard to see some of it, so I apologize. But this is an instrument, and I'm going to try to explain how this works, and let's see how we do. But this is comparing. Let's just give you a little bit of an idea, because you shouldn't understand any of this too much. But this is comparing tweets on the day of it's a Saturday. It's a Sunday, August 13, 2017. This is the weekend of Charlottesville. So there are major events on the Saturday, the march, and then I think I'm trying to remember. Heather Heyer is killed right by someone in a car. I don't have that person's name to mind, but that is a big story. And then this is so we've got all the words pertaining to that floating around. I'll try to explain where they're from. And then on this side we have this is the day after the election in 2016, and so this is all to do with Trump winning. But you'll see a bunch of stuff. So Michelle, that's Obama, of course. Gorilla. What is it? Right. Do you want to? I think it's also that people wanted to vote for the.
Oh yeah,
because it was. Yeah, it's really hard. So I have another paper called Chronopathy, which is about exactly that, because you cannot. Right. It's very hard to remember what happened, so you have to work hard to do that. Yes. So that's what we're trying to do: computationally aided history, just a timeline, because if you can't. I think at any point in the last, especially. The last 5 years, an interesting game of sorts would have been to say what happened in the last 2 weeks. What's the things that happened in the last 2 weeks? And you just try, and then there's oh yeah, but you missed Charlottesville, or you missed the Boy Scout thing, or you missed, there was a hurricane that, blah, blah, blah. It was too much, it was too much. So more than one thing happens on a day. So this is, there are Nazis, Charlottesville, so that's a place name. Higher, of course, you wouldn't have any idea about this. Antifa is being talked about, interestingly. But also Zara Larsson and Lady Gaga, because they had concerts on that day. It's Twitter, it's the whole thing. And what I'm going to try to show you, this is a map, and this is a ranked list, right? So these are the most important words on this day. So it's going to be Charlottesville, Nazis, and then you're going to see, yes, Larsson and Zara, which is going to seem wrong, but they had big events on because it's the whole day. Sorry, I should do it. And then Trump election voted Hillary, right? So they're the dominant words there. And then there's a a little tuning thing here. There's a number that can go between 0 to infinity that changes these contour lines, and as a result sort of picks up which one's important or not, right? There isn't some universal ranking here, right? So that's a thing I'm trying to get at here. There isn't a universal ranking, and it may take a couple of days for me to sort of show you this, but there we'll have these little flip books that change these boundaries as you tune this dial. Contour lines, right? So the most important things, right, is a function of these contour lines. Anything that's on that contour line is the same, has the same kind of importance, and anything on this one has the same importance as well. Just to say a few, I mean, we'll come back to it, but this is the zip distribution for this day for Twitter, rank 1 to rank 10 million, because Twitter is insane, right? We've got a lot of words. Doesn't quite go to 10 million, but that's the scale there. And so the top word on each day was retweet. It's not a word, right? It's just capital R, capital T. It's a Twitter thing. But then you see the and to and so on. So this is the rank of RT on this day, and it's got rank 1 on this day. So this is, normally you'd make a plot like this. I mean, that's fair enough. But I talked about this the other day. Making plots like this is quite powerful because there's no, I mean, this is in the future, but when we don't want to see they're sort of, different, or, one is dependent on the other in some way. So this was a nice thing to do. Get this to a rotation, make it symmetric. And then this is really a histogram underneath, right? So these colors here represent the number of words. So this is going to be a word that appeared once on this day and 0 times on this day. And I'll explain that. And there are about 1 million words that are in that little box there. So there are just tons of words in here, right? So what we're doing is we're taking a zip distribution here and a zip distribution here, and then making a histogram. And if they were exactly, well, I'm getting ahead. Okay. So there are 2 papers. Allotaxonometry is about rank divergence. And it's universal because it's just to do with ranks. And then a probability one as well, which has some nice properties. Okay, so here's the kind of the plan. We like to build dashboards. Maybe they have sort of bad. I don't know how people think about dash, but it's good. I mean, that's what we try to build the hedonimeter for. It's like one instrument on the dashboard of your sort of social measuring thing. We realize bad things can happen if you measure all the things about humanity and then start to turn into a Rick and Morty episode. But there's so these are these single scale instruments, right? You've got a measure of happiness here, like how much money, how many people are sick, blah, 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 right? It's good to have things that are incommensurate. Of course, we have a great desire to turn everything into money, right? I mean, this happens repeatedly, but especially early on with building the hedonimeter, people would say, so how do I make money out of this? Right, of course. Of course, and maybe but yeah. There was a terrible paper years ago called, well, the title is dreadful. It's because it's just Twitter predicts the stock market. It should be colon a little bit, and in very special circumstances, something, something, something. But they just went with the big boom. Companies got started.
Twitter predicts the stock market, colon, how to lose all your money.
I did in the 90s. I met with a guy who started a stock firm based on chaos theory. It was fantastic. Obviously, it does not exist anymore. It just didn't make any sense whatsoever. This crazy Texan guy on Wall Street. So, you want to, if we're flying a plane, we're pretty okay with this at this point, that we need a bunch of, we're totally okay with cockpits having, if you see a pilot and they've got one number in front of them and maybe like a steering, like you would be very worried about that plane, right? We're very used to, this is a difficult thing to do and you need to know lots of things, right? You need to be skilled. So over and over and over, we actually want to have planes that have one number. That's kind of what you see over and over again for especially for complex social phenomena, to do with the environment as well. What's the one number to rule them all kind of business? So, you got to fight against that. We've had a little bit of that, right, with seeing why in really fundamental ways you can't do it when we say the Buckingham Pi theorem, right? Like if it ends up being 3, you really understand the thing and you've got these three dimensionless numbers, there are three things to measure about it, right? Okay. So that's how, and it's okay if this is comprehensible. If you're well trained, it can be a lot of things to take in. Maybe you need another person with you, blah, 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 blah. But complex systems are, planes are obviously they're complex enough. So there's a scale, and we've been talking about all these systems that have many different types, right? So there's an internal diversity of components, and words make for a beautiful example. So lots of different types of words, different frequencies. And if we're trying to track all of them, you need a little time series for each one. And maybe kind of understand how they fit together, but you want to know V is like flatlining along. It's always, pretty good. And then Lady Gaga's going like this, right. If I get story wrangling, we can look at some of them. I know it should work. Anyway, so, and then you may need to, change the meters, but you don't want to have 10 million meters right in front of you on a dashboard. That's not going to be great. But there may be 10 million things to keep track of. So you want something to like move that up and down, like which things are important. So we want to, I guess I'm using the word comprehensible, which may be problematic, but you want them to adjust these little dashboards. And as I said, that thing that I kind of showed you at the start, the allotaxonometry, which I waved my hands around, there's a big picture. There's kind of a map. We like maps. It might take a while to understand this particular map, but we love maps. And we also do like ranks. So, and it's just one measure. I talk about this in more depth in the next thing, but I'm not sure if this will come up. This is the Lexico Calorimeter, right? This is a weird thing we made. So this is measuring health. This is a sort of real-time public. It's not real-time because we're using old data here. It doesn't function every day like Untitled, but this is so here's your map, right? The US always makes for a great map, and it's nice things you can do with hexagons and so on. This is a ridiculous thing where we take phrases that pertain to food and pertain to exercise, and then kind of put them together, right? So everything that sort of means pizza ends up as being pizza. Everything that means kind of skiing ends up as being skiing. And then there's this sort of very broad calories in, calories out kind of ratio thing. We're not, right. But this is then the rank, right? If you do that ratio of calories kind of out to calories in, it's got Colorado, Wyoming, Vermont. This is 2012 maybe, down to, unfortunately, Mississippi and Louisiana. And then the thing is, this is from Twitter, which is an absurd thing to do, right? So it's humans, it's maybe some bots, 2012 or 13. It's restaurants, it's, like ski places, talking about skiing if you're in Vermont, right? It's like all sorts of stuff. But this correlates with obesity rates, right? This absurdity. So you could start to see what people are talking about. This is Vermont. So Vermont has, but it's again one of these maps and rank thing, right? You want both. It's not at least these two things. I think they're very helpful because if you were just looking at this map, you'd be like, oh yeah, these are on top, I guess, sort of, and then, but, and it's good. You need to see the geographic aspect, but also you want to see it ranked. So you just have to have those things paired. And this is a nice interactive thing, right? Because you can go and jump on one of them here and see where it pops up, and it gets these little word shift things tell you these are sort of in that similar vein to the allotaxonographs, but this is telling you why is Vermont, actually Vermont's about average in terms of this sort of calories in thing, right? So why is that? And you can just see which words are sort of pushing it up. So Vermont talks about bacon a lot, which, and then, but its expenditure is kind of better, skiing, running, snowboarding, hiking, sledding, yeah.
This might be very different than a thing looking at politics, because this is clearly measuring a property of humans that has been reported to Twitter.
Bots
or
and
some of the other things where the political event crystallizes on Twitter and propagates outwards is kind of a different phenomenon.
yeah, I mean, they're all imprints in some way, right? I mean, some people are saying, I am eating delicious bacon, or, we have bacon for whatever, $5. Like this is it's a weird lens, but they're going to have different.
I mean, it's not that social media doesn't affect eating habits, but maybe speed at which you can get fat is much slower than the speed at which
Oh.
you can interact with Twitter.
Disinformation versus
Yeah.
bad diet. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. The idea here was to make a public, public health thing we could measure in real time. But yes.
Is this like a dashboard that could be replaced by one of those graphs? I'm wondering, how could this translate to that sort of?
So this is again, it's like in the second semester, but this is a bit of a different thing. These worksheets, because there's a score. You're scoring something. Here's a phrase has a calorie attached to it. So if you say pizza, it has a, and we did the weirdest thing. I mean, sorry, there's not much you can do with it. You can't say this pizza is actually a pizza, right? So it's sort of like what a serving of pizza kind of roughly has. So if you mention it, and then the activity stuff like skiing, it's like, what do you typically put out in an hour of skiing? Very, very crude, right? It's very, very crude. So, but there's a score, and happiness is a score for each word. That's different for the ranking stuff where we just have counts. We're not adding anything on top of it. So this is a higher order kind of thing where we've said, okay, we've got counts, and now we have this score that we have that's external, externally determined or whatever, and then that gives rise to these. And you can see there are 4 different things. It's more complicated. So this thing is a rawer thing in some sense. Oh yeah, see the lexic, right, I did it. Okay, this is XKCD, and it's from it's the how-to book. And so it's an attempt to deal with zip distributions. I know this might be a little hard to see. Can you see it? It's an attempt to deal with zip distributions, and it's baby names. So you guys are going to play around with this a little bit. And it's the top names, and these different. And we'll look at these. It's very fun to look at them in these different years. 1880, Will, Maud, Minnie. So these, 1920 and 1930. These are the dominant names. I think it's just. Is it just? No, it's sort of a mixture of girl and boy names. It's kind of odd. I'm not sure how this was done. But for you guys, Aiden, Diego, Gavin, Haley, Ethan, Madison, you might know some people with those names. And this is a really interesting place to, so this is, this is, right, because of Monica's and Phoebe's and Ross's, and right, you can see for presidents, right, people started calling their kids Roosevelt in 1904, straight up, they'll just go for the back end. Donald has been in a long decline since 1930. Same with Ronald, right? They're just names that they've been on this, my name has been dying away. But more recently, my wife's name, she's an Amy, and it's AIMEE, which just has this 1970, and then it's gone. It's it was cool for a bit and gone. And so you do see that with baby names. And the work on this, I'm not really totally sure about, but things that go up really fast tend to come down somewhat fast as well. So there's a measure of fattishness. Interesting. Lots of things in baby names. Socioeconomic stuff, the well-to-do tend to have kind of interesting different names, and that maybe percolates out. That's, again, research seems to suggest that. And it's a sort of a just so kind of story. Anyway. So Aiden will have a lot of. There's a Jaden, Aiden, Braden. A lot of Aidens. There's Sladens, Xadens. Everyone went bananas on that. Aidens. But how do you do? So what? This is a one-page thing. It's a list. It's sort of fun to look at, right? But clearly we have counts. We have ranks. How do you sort of contend with this? And each one, there's Tammy. Tammy has a time series, right? And there are little things to play around with online, right? That I don't know what the best one is these days, but you can do that, right? You can put in a name and it sort of pops up a particular, it'll show you the time series and yeah. Okay. So this is, I'm just putting here to say it's kind of this is one way to try and deal with these things. Okay. Just, sort of list them, make some graphs, make some statements about it. Yeah. connect to friends. Okay, so this is some work that, again, came out of this class. It was published 2017 or 18, but 2017, but it's really 2014 kind of work. And this is from Google Books. So Google Books is a huge enterprise. Just briefly, sort of this emergence of this, or this claimed sort of creation of a field called culturomics, right? So Google and has partnered with a bunch of characters. Some of them have become quite disgraced. But anyway, whatever, professors. So the Google Ngrams, you guys have messed around with that? Is that anything to you? Like, does that, yeah? Or who's never heard of this? Just please show me. Okay, good. All right, so there's Google Trends, which people I think engage with somewhat more. It's an interesting thing in itself. It's sort of a special thing. It's like, here's what people are searching for. It's a different act to like what people are tweeting about, which is a different act to what people are talking about at home and so on. Google Ngrams. So this is Google. It's a weird thing, and we've criticized it. And if you go to the Wikipedia page now for this thing, it actually has our paper as a sort of a good example of why it's problematic. So we're happy to do that. It was a difficult thing to do. It's a difficult thing to criticize in science and have impact, something to do with lies and truth, I suppose. But so this is, it's year scale. This is for English, and it's a corpus that was treated in, put together in 2019. Things have changed over time in terms of how they do it. But essentially, hopefully being paid to do it, but I guess not well. People, would rip books apart and photocopied them and OCR, right? So you've got all this sort of, and so those things are available as well. That's a huge data set, right? PDFs that have been turned into OCR material, optical character recognition. And then the effort was to say, well, let's just take every book published in 1840, take all of them, and we'll just count up all the words, right? And the thing you dealt with earlier was Google's like web search stuff. It's just Google crawling around. It used to be that Google would cache websites, which obviously sort of went away at some point. But if the website wasn't there, you could look at Google's cached version of it, which was sort of a service. But anyway, that's from searching just what's on the web. This is, of course, from published books, which is really a powerful thing. But anyway, so again, these are time series. These are just some examples. Albert Einstein's changed a lot. You can easily find things. You cannot search for a comma. It's tricky. You see something strange has happened in the last, and something strange has changed in the books they've taken in. So that's very problematic, right? Because if your corpus that you're assembling every year changes in nature, like how do we even do this? This is to indicate that they were putting a lot of scientific and medical work in there. So you think it's books, right? But it's actually increasingly filled with science. And this is indicative of just the growth of science through the last century. And I'm using the word like figure, see figure 7, right? And et al. And those sorts of things, which is a bit funny. And you can see, so years, I think, let's try 1831 and then maybe 1907. Oh, so bad. It's this little magic touch bar, which is going to be killed, right? Basically, it has a wings fall off button, which is a Gary Larson reference for you out there. I'm going to find that now because I'm kind of mad about this. Wings fall off. Before XKCD, there was this. Anyway. Gary Larson. So scientists used to have Gary Larson like little cartoons everywhere. And it's very like organismal and kind of big scale and so on. And XKCD, of course, and he retired at some point. But XKCD is all information and computer science. It's an interesting change, but yeah. Is he? Oh, really? Oh, good, good. Yeah, they're all generally single panel things. He has some classics, just fantastic. This is years, right? So you look at this, and this is actually a big thing in the original paper, which is published in Science, huge splash. This was to indicate that. So there's a not so big a spike here. This is for the year, right? 1831. I mean, we're interpreting it as a year. It could be a page number or something, but generally speaking, a year. And of course, it's kind of peaking around 1830, and then dying off slowly. And then the claim in that first paper, at least, was, oh, look at this. We talk about the present much more, but it drops off faster. So this is this, like, culture is sort of speeding up. Let me put in a couple of others. Look, we're going to get there. 1953, because if you put in, 1900, that's not going to be great. Right, so they're kind of increasing. The now matters more. But this is actually reflective of science as well. There's a half-life for science. It's I forgot the right words, but it's Big Science, Little Science, a DeSola Prize book in the 60s, again, which I think involved lots of graduate students being, sent into libraries to count everything. Because, you could, so you want to see here's a paper, which papers reference that paper. There's the library. Read every paper that happens in the future or was written in the future and go through its citations. So they would sort of stick within journals, for example, just say, okay, we're just going to do physical review A, just go through this. And then, you'd have to do this by hand. There was no other way to do it. You've got a paper here, what cites it in the future? Huge change, right, with the web. And then in the late 90s, you could push on a paper and say, what cites it? And you're like, oh my God. Which obviously may mean little to you, but it's a huge change in things. Anyway, this is this kind of half-life sort of thing, right? So that papers in journals would tend to cite back into the history of that journal, but that was shrinking, right? It was sort of shrinking, that little gap. Depends on the journal and so on. And you're getting more volume and these things. Was that a movie? So, but if you put in something like, I don't know, 2000 is going to be weird. Yeah. Sort of still there. So this is very fun, right? Cherry picking, spectacular, right? Let's put in cherry picking. Yeah. So very problematically, you can go into this and say, I'm going to look for a thing that I think is maybe going up or down, and then I'll find maybe some other things. There's a whole book's written about how God is declining in culture because sacred words are tending to go down. But if what's happening is actually this thing is just filled up with science, there's just all this scientific literature that have just been shoveling into the machine, you're not measuring the right thing. You can think things are declining on Twitter, but it's actually just because BTS is talked about so much, right? So it's true, BTS is taking up a bigger percentage, but it might not be an absolute thing. Okay, so it's a problematic thing, and I think it's led to some real issues. And it's sort of it's like a typical Google thing where they make something and they just sort of don't really improve it. Like Google flu trends was this, when it first came along, was this really remarkable, had some remarkable success, based on people searching, right, for flu and for symptoms and various other things associated with having a fever. They could sort of get a sense of how much, right, the flu was going to take off that year. But of course, it got messed up and game with and whatever, and then they just burned it all down instead of trying to improve it. We have funding from Google, so I do apologize. So I should say that into the camera properly. Okay, so this is, okay, so long wind up here, but this is a zip distribution, and this is for decades starting in 1820 going through to 2000, so 10-year blocks of words. So imagine taking every book in that box and counting all the words, and then making a zip distribution out of it. and then doing that for every decade. So that's basically what this is. You see the zip distribution doesn't really change, right? These are overlaid zip distributions. They all look the same. They have this break in scaling that we saw for the, this is actually quite typical of language, and Jake Williams figured it out, I think. So it tends to have this break, and this is sort of typical of a size of a document. So this is sort of a typical scale of a book. Books, of course, lots of different sizes. Okay. But some people will sort of have said in the past, like, oh, it doesn't change, there's nothing interesting. And until 2000, people really only measured out to about here anyway, so that was a bit of a problem. We had to figure this out. But even so, and if you look at this is the top 10 engrams. This is how much the frequency cutoff for the 10th 1 gram, right? If you look at the zip distribution, where does the top 10,000th 1 gram? What's its relative frequency? I mean, it doesn't change much over time. The 100,000th doesn't change much over time. The top 1 gram, pretty much through the whole thing, is the comma. But what you start to see, if you look at this, is, okay, the comma is the number one thing. This is why they did it, right? They broke commas apart like this and periods apart and counted them. They did some pretty funny, like its, I think, is it apostrophe. It's a 3 gram. Like, yeah. So it's a difficult database. And there are 1 grams, 2 grams, 3 grams, 4 grams, 5 grams, right? So that's like lexical units. I mean, words plus, basically. And in terms of what the database is, the 3 grams is the biggest one. 3 grams is sort of a great space to have lots of creativity, and the tail isn't quite as long, right? So anyway, big data set. But what you start to see is, all right, so if you had this like list, this zip distribution list here, written down all the words, kind of like XKCD did, right? And this would be the top names. You'd see, like, are they bubbling around? And what you tend to see, and I'll have this on the next slide, is that, as you might expect, is that there's more fluctuations down here, right? There are more fluctuations the further you go down in rank. And you might think, well, so this is, and there isn't a particular turning point, but this is a sort of a robust, the comma is number one. We like commas. But then the top 10 grams, there's a few that move in and out. V is definitely always in the top 10, these 10-year periods. There are a few other little pops, and we look at that in our paper, but there's sort of more here, more here, more here, right? There's more stuff moving in and out. So this is this scaling thing, and we call it turbulence, right? It's sort of homage to turbulence in fluids, but and because turbulence in fluids has a scaling story as well, there's a scaling here that's happening, and that's the next piece here. I know this is going to look like a lot, but basically this is our zip distribution here, right? This is the basic thing, frequency of usage, and then we have this point that, in fact, for words, it typically has two pieces. So there's a kind of a branch point there for some rank, and then we'll have this idea of flux, which is just what's the fraction of words that drop or come up, and it could be a fraction or an actual number, and then and they're going to have two. You could connect it to the frequency of usage or the rank as well. We don't have to worry about this too much. But it has a scaling story, right? So that this is, if we look at it in terms of rank, the flux, this is a real number. I mean, an integer is increasing, like rank to some exponent, and then another exponent after that breakpoint, and they're over 1, right? So this turbulence is increasing not just linearly with rank, but actually going up. So it's becoming more and more and more and more and more sort of scrambling. So this is an observation, and then we have to try and think about how we'll deal with it. I think that it's really the same things. Maybe I'll just concentrate on this one. So this is the average flux. This is the rank of a word, right? So there's no flux for the top word, and then as we go up and up and up, it's increasing superlinearly. And this is the most it could be, right? This is the ceiling of it, because the most the flux could be is all of the words up to a certain rank changed, right? So they just completely changed. So that's what that ceiling is. And you have that, say, for if you have lists like movies that debuted in a year, in terms of box office. You go to the next year, because it's connected to a year, it's got to be just a different list of movies, right? So that whole list is completely changed in terms of views and downloads, and that's when we get back to more of this normal kind of thing. All right, it's taking me long enough. Okay, so this will be this week. Okay, so this is this example that I gave you at the start, and it doesn't have this measurement instrument on top, which will be this thing called rank turbulence divergence. This is simply a histogram of some complexity, I suppose. But again, this is the day after the election. I think that's right. And because on the day of the election, the dominant word was Hillary, the next day it was Trump, right? Like there was a shift in those 2 days, because the presumption was Hillary was going to win, Hillary Clinton was going to win, and the next day it was Trump. And I'm just using those words because that's how they were referred to. We addressed that in some of our papers. It was Hillary, Trump. Bernie gets called Bernie, right? So this sort of depends which, but there is a sort of a problematic thing with women being called by their first names and men by their last names. So this is really a histogram. It's in log space, which complicates it. So all of these little boxes are in log space. They're quite small, and then the coloring again is based on how many counts are in a cell. And so you sort of look at this thing, and it feels like all these little yellow ones. There's only just one word in there, right? There's just one word in these light yellow ones. So that's Nazis. So that means that on this day, I mean, it's a ridiculous thing. It's a terrible thing to say, but to talk about. But the word Nazi suddenly appears on Twitter, which is a bad sign, and its rank, this is log space, right? So its rank is 100, 200 is maybe here, 300. So it's a very high rank here, right? This is a really high rank on this day. And over on this day, it's more like, well, I guess Nazis appears to some extent. It's more like, 10 to 20,000 on this day. So buried down. In Charlottesville, which has really popped up, it's at about 100, which is, this is very much competing with function words, right? And then back here, Charlottesville, it's, city in the US is going to be talked about. It's more out like 50, 60,000. And again, it's a bit hard to say it here, but to compare it directly, but people's vocabs are sort of 30, 40,000 words, maybe. So getting out to 1 million is really a long way out. This is also getting rid of all emojis and hashtags and other things. Just in this case, right? We could include them. Okay, so there's a little automatic labeler thing which just comes along and tries to finds the word that's most on the outside of this histogram. So underlying is just a histogram, and then there's this labeler, and for many of them, it's it really does get the word that's right there. So this is really is going to be that word. That's lady. That's Gaga. Higher. This only appears. There's only one word in this box, and it's Heather Heyer, which is very common on this day, and rare back here. And then as it comes down here, this label is just going to pick out a word that's in this box, right? There are like 1 million words in this box. It's very, very dark. So there are like 1 million words in here. So let me this is rankings, right? So it's 1, 2, 3, and you can see that structure here. That's a 1, that's a 2, that's a 3. And is changed order. So and was 4, and now it was 4th on this side. Now it's 5th, and is moved up. So there's just a little tiny change in the ranking. But this sort of thinness at the top tells you the sort of stability of function words. And then Trump, which was actually, Trump is at 10 on this day, right? So this is because of the future is over on this side. If we can certainly compare, if we compare this day to like 5 years before, Trump will be much more like Charlottesville, be out here and then very uncommon on the first day. But it's here, and because he's president, he's still talked about enormously. And in fact, he's in the top 100. He's actually being talked about more than Charlottesville if you draw that line through here. And that was the story, right? There are Nazis, marches, there's riots and things happening, and Trump is, obviously as president, just yeah. Remember that 2017? Yeah, a mere 4 years ago. 4 years ago, because that led into the hurricanes soon happened. Harvey happened after it, which did eventually cause great damage in Houston, and then Maria, which we've written all these papers about these things. So let me explain what's going on. So that's what's happening at this end. That's why there's sort of a little bit of a, right? It's logarithmic. So rank 1, rank 2, right? Log 10 of 1, log 10 of 2, log 10 of 3. That's why there's a splintering here. Now you typically see this splintering here as well. And what's happening is, okay, we've got a zip distribution over here, usual thing where we have the very common word, which is RT, the, da, da, da. And then we get down to words that appear once, and words that appear twice, and words that appear 3 times. And as we've said, like half of all words in your lexicon appear once, maybe a 6th appear twice. We'll get to that later. So there are a lot of words that are rare. And we're doing ranking, so all of those, and we talked about ranking, right? So ranking for the last ones is they're all got the same rank, right? Whatever, right? So you get to you're going down this list, you've got a list of words, and you get to all the 2s, and then you've got all the words that have 1 next to them in terms of counts. You find they have some sort of list of ranks, if you maybe do alphabetical, and you take their average rank. And they all get that same average rank, right? Which, I talked about how if you came first and second, but it was a tie, you'd have an average rank of 1.5. But now we're talking about things that, there's like a million of them. So their average rank is something ridiculous, right? It's out close to 1 million. And so there's a huge variation, a huge range of things that end up with that. So if you like, it's like this big spread here, roughly. All right. So because you can project onto the marginal here, and you'll get your zip distribution. If you project onto the marginal here, you'll get your zip distribution. So this is what's happening here. These are words that appear twice, and then these are words that appear once, twice, and then 3 or more. And then what's happening here? These are words that appeared 0 times on this day. So we have to combine the word list, right? So you have to take the word list here and the word list here and combine them. So there are new species of words that appear on this day, and there are new species, or there are species that did not appear again, right? They're lost. So we expect this at the end, at the tails of this is a very important aspect of this. The turbulence is so extreme, and even if we're measuring 10% of all tweets, so we don't have all the tweets, right? So it's true the tail changes a little bit potentially, but there are words that we just know out of the tail will not appear, right? They're not even misspellings. They're just like total disasters of words and crazy things happening, keyboard mashings, right? We do have a paper on, this is terrible, on, I'll finish, on words with repetitive structures in them, right? So this is quite terrible, but ha 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 ha, right? Stretchable words. So we wrote a whole paper on this, and it's like, dude, right? So anyway, people are playing around with words, they're doing all sorts of things out here. But let me just try to explain this, and I'll give you I'll explain these things very quickly, and then we'll come back on Thursday. Okay, so any word here, like this word Richava, it appeared 0 times on this day because it's ranked last. So all the words, so we're going to have this last rank associated with the things that appeared 0 times. It appeared once on this day, and then this is something that appeared 2 times on this day and 0 on this day, and then all the way out to here. And then this is a word that appears 0 times on this day and was really common on this day. So this is a big change. Svetanovic, anyone? When I first made this, I'm like, this is a soccer player, maybe, who did something cool in Europe, because there's a background of like sports and music, but it's one of the white supremacists who was in the main picture that was, I think, broadcast around with the tiki torches. Oh my God. It's just sort of mad. It's just complete madness. And then you see these are kind of weird words here, right? These are getting a little strange. Suede denim is down here with a hyphen, spuffed. I'll tell you, I'll just point to these. So if you had identical systems, this is what the histogram would look like. So these are important endpoints to know about. If they were completely disjoint, they'd look like this. And that, that will increasingly happen as you compare things that are more and more different. That's fine. And if they were randomized, they'd look like this. And so this is not randomization. This is really important. There are good methods for measuring randomized shuffling of stuff, right? So Spearman's rank correlation coefficient is built around shuffling, for example. It's a beautiful measurement. That's what it would look like because we're in log space. It's kind of, if we were in normal space, it'd be just a nice big mess. But if you turn it into log space, it's going to be bloop like this. That is not what this looks like. So we need to develop an instrument that measures this kind of shape, and because anything that thinks about randomization is not going to work. So the turbulence has to be built in. I am sorry it took so long. Too long for a TikTok, right? I signed up for TikTok, so I'm practicing. I feel like there's got to be something that I get. But we have Tic-Tac-Toe-Ructobooks. No, Tic-Tac-Toe-Buctopus. That's what I read. What is it? Oh, yeah. I was thinking of putting quality material in, but. Okay.
Do you know what Obama is?
I don't. But it was gone by here. They're not talking about that one here. So that's the, yeah, right. Is it Obama misspelled? Or is it some kind of, it's pretty prevalent, right? So it's something. I mean, it's Barack Obama, but he is Barack Obama. Sorry. Yeah. So he was president, and